February 14th, 2012. The air in the VFW hall was thick. It smelled of stale coffee and damp wool coats. Farmers sat on folding metal chairs. Their shoulders were stooped. Their hands were clean for a change. This was an auction, not for equipment, not for livestock, for land. The Henderson parcel. 320 acres of the best black soil in the county. It was the kind of land that made families. It was the kind of land that broke them. The auctioneer, a man named Bill Peterson, stood on a small stage. He knew every man in that room. He knew their fathers. He knew their debts. He started the bidding at $300,000, a number that was both an invitation and a warning. The big operators were here, men who farmed thousands of acres, men who drove new trucks, men who talked to their bankers in a language of futures and options. The bidding moved fast. $325, $350, $375. It was a tennis match between two men in the front row. They nodded. They lifted a finger. The numbers climbed. 400,000, 410, 420. Bill Peterson scanned the room. His rhythm was practiced. His voice was a steady, percussive hum. He was looking for the last dollar. The room was tense. This was more than a sale. It was a realignment of power in the county. $450,000. One of the men in the front row shook his head. He was out. The other man smiled. He had it. Bill Peterson raised his gavel. Going once. He scanned the crowd one last time. His eyes landed on a woman in the third row. She was 72 years old. Her hair was white. Her back was straight. Her name was Eleanor Vance. She had farmed in the county for 44 years. She was quiet. She kept to herself. She raised her paddle. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. You could hear a man in the back clear his throat. Bill Peterson paused. He knew Eleanor. Everyone knew Eleanor. He leaned into the microphone. "I have a bid from Eleanor Vance." The man in the front row looked back. His smile was gone. He looked confused. Then he looked annoyed. Bill Peterson looked at Eleanor. "What is your bid, Eleanor?" Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It cut through the silence like a winter wind. $475,000. A gasp went through the room. It was a number beyond reason. It was $25,000 more than the last bid. It was a knockout punch. The man in the front row stood up. He said something to the man next to him. Then he walked out of the VFW hall. He didn't look back. Bill Peterson looked at Eleanor. His face showed nothing, but his eyes held a universe of questions. He had to ask. It was procedure. "Ma'am, what are your terms?" Eleanor Vance looked at the auctioneer. She looked at the faces staring at her. Farmers, neighbors, the curious. She saw a man standing by the wall. His name was Frank Henderson. He was the president of the county bank. It was his family's land being sold. He was watching her. His expression was one of absolute disbelief. Eleanor met his gaze. Then she looked back at the auctioneer on the stage. She said one word. "Cash." The room did not erupt. It did not applaud. It went from silence to something deeper, a stillness, a heavy, weighted quiet that comes after a lightning strike. Frank Henderson felt something he couldn't quite name. It was the sound of a story he thought he knew, suddenly having a different ending. He remembered his father. He remembered a conversation from a lifetime ago. He remembered a young woman sitting in his father's office, a young woman with grief in her eyes and dirt under her fingernails. His father had been kind. His father had been certain. He had told her no, for her own good. If you're new here, this is what we do. We tell the stories that get forgotten, the stories of quiet work, of long victories, the stories that prove the world wrong, 1 acre at a time. If you believe those stories matter, hit the subscribe button, because we have so many more to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. Let's go back. Let's go back to March of 1968. The mud was deep that year. The frost was just leaving the ground. It was a season of grief. Eleanor Vance was 28 years old. She had been a widow for 6 months. Her husband, David, had been killed in a tractor rollover the previous fall. A freak accident, a moment of bad luck. It had taken everything. The farm felt empty. The house was too quiet. She had their 4-year-old daughter, Sarah. She had 160 acres of good land. She had David's old Alice Chalmers tractor. And she had a payment due at the bank. She knew how to farm. She had grown up on a farm. She had worked alongside David since the day they were married. She knew the soil. She knew the seasons. She knew the work. But the world didn't know that. The world saw a young widow. The world saw a liability. She needed an operating loan, just a small one, enough for seed corn, for fuel, for fertilizer, $3,000, a standard loan for a farm her size. She put on her best dress. She drove to town in her Ford Falcon. She walked into the County National Bank. The bank was a brick building on the town square. It had a feeling of permanence, of certainty. The president of the bank was a man named George Henderson. He was a pillar of the community. He served on the school board. He was a deacon at his church. He had given David and Eleanor their first loan to buy the farm. He was a kind man. Everyone said so. He greeted her warmly. He offered his condolences. He listened patiently as she made her case. She laid out her plan. She knew her numbers. She knew her expected yields. She was not asking for a handout. She was asking for a chance. George Henderson listened. He steepled his fingers. He looked at her with an expression of deep paternal concern. "Eleanor," he said, his voice was gentle, "I knew your father. I knew David. He was a good man, a fine farmer. This is a terrible tragedy." Eleanor waited. She knew what was coming next. The word, "but." He continued, "Farming is a hard business. It's a hard business for a man with 2 good arms and a strong back. It's no place for a woman on her own, especially with a little one to raise." Eleanor felt a cold anger rise in her chest. She kept her voice steady. "I can do the work, Mr. Henderson. I've always done the work." "I know," he said, and he smiled a sad, knowing smile. "I know you're a hard worker, but this is different. You'll have breakdowns. You'll have decisions to make that would challenge any man. What if you get a wet spring? What if the price of corn drops? I would not be doing my duty as a banker or as a friend of your family if I put you in that position." He leaned forward. His voice dropped. "I'm not going to be the man who lets you lose your family's farm. The best thing for you to do is sell. Sell the land. There are good men who would pay a fair price. You could take the money, move to town, get a nice little house, find a job as a secretary perhaps. It would be a respectable life, a safe life." He said it with such conviction, such absolute certainty. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being malicious. He genuinely believed he was helping her. He was protecting her from a future he had already decided she could not handle. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who cared about you. Someone who thought they were protecting you from failure, someone who loved you even. That kindness is a cage. It's a wall built of good intentions. And it is the hardest wall in the world to tear down. Because you can't fight it with anger. You can't argue against its logic. You can only disprove it. With years, with decades, with a life of quiet, relentless work. If you know that feeling, drop a comment below. Tell us about the kindest cage someone ever tried to build around you. Because what Eleanor Vance did next is for everyone who has ever been told no for their own good. She stood up. She looked George Henderson in the eye. She did not argue. She did not plead. She said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Henderson." And she walked out of the bank. She walked out into the cold March air. She did not cry. The anger was too hot for tears. It was a different kind of refusal. It wasn't about her balance sheet. It wasn't about her collateral. It was about him. It was about his certainty, his decision about who she was, what she was capable of. That was a debt she could never repay, a line of credit she would never be granted. She drove home. The 160 acres looked different. They looked vulnerable. They looked like something that could be taken away. Her father, Thomas, was there. He had come to help with her daughter, Sarah. He was a man of few words. He had farmed his whole life. He was retired now. He saw her face when she walked in the door. He didn't need to ask. He said no, she said. Her father nodded. He walked to the window and looked out at the fields. The black dirt was waiting. He stood there for a long time. Eleanor thought he was going to tell her that Henderson was right. She thought he was going to tell her to give up, to sell. Instead, he turned to her. His eyes were clear. He looked at her hands, calloused, capable. He said, "They took your husband. They won't take your dirt." He paused. "The dirt is enough." That was all he said. It was not a pep talk. It was a statement of fact, a foundation. The dirt is enough. That night, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table. She opened a simple ledger book, the kind you buy at the Five and Dime. On the first page, she wrote a heading, Farm Operations, 1968. She had no loan. She had no credit. She had the farm, free and clear. But that was just asset. She needed cash, operating cash. She had two vehicles, the farm truck and the Ford Falcon. The next day, she sold the Falcon. She got $450 for it. She took the money home. She counted it out on the kitchen table. In her ledger, she made the first entry. Income, sale of car, $450. She drove to the co-op. She bought seed corn, $210. She bought diesel fuel, $80. She had $160 left. It wasn't enough for fertilizer. It wasn't enough for herbicide. It wasn't enough for anything else. She remembered her grandfather. She remembered how he farmed. He never bought fertilizer. He said the soil gives you what you need if you treat it right. He practiced crop rotation. Corn one year, soybeans the next to fix nitrogen in the soil. Then oats, then clover to be plowed under as green manure. It was old-fashioned. It was slow. The university experts said it was inefficient. But it was cheap. It cost nothing but time and knowledge. She would plant half her fields in corn. The other half she would plant in soybeans. She had just enough money for the seed. The work began. She was up before the sun. She made breakfast for Sarah. She got her father settled with the girl. Then she went to the machine shed. The Alice Chalmers WC tractor was from 1948. It was David's pride and joy. But it was old. Things broke. She had watched David fix it 100 times. Now she had to do it herself. She had the manuals. She had the tools. She learned. She learned the feel of a stripped bolt, the sound of a bad bearing, the smell of burning oil. Her hands became coated in a permanent layer of grease and grime. She broke knuckles. She swore. She kept going. She plowed the fields. She disked them. She planted. Row by careful row. Her neighbors watched. They were good people, but they were practical people. They saw a woman on an old tractor trying to do a man's job. They felt pity. They shook their heads. At the diner in town, they talked. She's a proud woman, too proud for her own good. George Henderson did her a favor. She'll lose it all by fall. George Henderson heard the talk. He felt a sad vindication. He had done the right thing. He had tried to protect her. One afternoon, her planter broke. A crucial part had sheared off. The co-op didn't have one. They would have to order it. It would take a week. A week she didn't have. The planting window was closing. She sat on the ground, staring at the broken piece of metal. For the first time, she felt despair. Maybe they were right. Maybe she couldn't do this. A truck pulled into her driveway. It was her neighbor, Earl Garvey. He was a man in his 60s, weathered and kind. He got out of his truck. He walked over to her. He didn't say hello. He just looked at the planter. "Looks like a number 7 hitch pin," he said. "I've got a spare one in my shop." Eleanor was speechless. Earl went to his truck and came back with a toolbox and the part. He didn't offer to install it. He just set it on the ground next to her. He looked at her. "David pulled my son out of a snowdrift back in '65. Never said a word about it. Just did it." He nodded once. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. Eleanor picked up the part. It was heavy. It was real. It fit. She finished planting that evening, working by the tractor's headlights. The dirt is enough. She harvested that fall. The yields weren't great. The fields were weedy. The corn was a little low on nitrogen, but it was a crop. She sold it. She paid her property taxes in cash. She paid her insurance in cash. She bought groceries in cash. She went to the bank to deposit the rest. George Henderson saw her at the teller window. He saw the deposit slip. It wasn't a lot of money, but it wasn't zero. He nodded to her, a polite, distant nod. He was still certain. He believed it was a fluke, a bit of luck. Next year, he thought. Next year she'll see I was right. But next year came, and Eleanor was still there. She planted clover on the corn ground. She planted corn on the soybean ground. She learned about soil health. She learned that the earth was not a machine you fed inputs into. It was a living thing, a partner. Her yields got better, not as good as the high-input farms around her, but her costs were a fraction of theirs. Let me tell you about the next few years, because this is where the story gets bigger. This is where the math starts to change. In 1972, a small 40-acre parcel next to her farm came up for sale. The owner was retiring. Eleanor had saved every penny for 4 years. She had a surplus. She went to the sale. She bought the land. She paid $8,000. Cash. She now owned 200 acres. In 1978, the rumblings of the farm crisis began. Interest rates were climbing. Commodity prices were unstable. Her neighbors were leveraged. They had borrowed heavily in the good years to buy bigger equipment, more land. Now the banks were calling. Eleanor had no debt. She owed nothing to anyone. Another farm on her road went under, a family she had known her whole life. They were forced to sell. Eleanor bought 80 acres of their land. She paid $32,000. Cash. She now owned 280 acres. George Henderson saw the deed transfer in the county paper. He felt a flicker of something. It wasn't annoyance. It was confusion. His certainty was being challenged by a quiet woman and her ledger book. He drove past her farm. He saw the old Alice Chalmers still running. He saw her fields clean and well tended. He saw no signs of failure. He saw only work. The 1980s were brutal. The farm crisis hit like a hurricane. Foreclosure auctions were a weekly event at the VFW Hall. Men who had farmed for generations lost everything. They were good farmers. They had done what the experts told them to do. Get big or get out. Borrow, leverage, expand. Eleanor survived. She did more than survive. She thrived. Her low-input, no-debt model was perfectly suited for the downturn. When prices were low, her profits were small, but they were still profits. Her neighbors, with their huge banknotes, were drowning in red ink. George Henderson retired in 1985. His son, Frank, took over the bank. Frank was a modern banker. He had an MBA. He understood complex financial instruments. He looked at Eleanor Vance's file. He saw a farmer with no loans, significant cash reserves, expanding acreage. He saw a success story. He did not see the story his father had told him, the story of the poor widow he had tried to protect. By 1994, Eleanor was 54 years old. Her daughter Sarah was in college studying agronomy. Eleanor was no longer just a farmer. She was a force. She bought another 120 acres. This time, it cost her $150,000. Cash. She now owned 400 acres, free and clear. The men at the diner stopped talking about her. They started watching her. They started asking her questions about cover crops, about rotations. She never preached. She never said, "I told you so." She just answered their questions. She shared what she had learned, because the dirt is enough for everyone. By 2005, she was farming over 500 acres. She had finally bought a new tractor, a John Deere 7810. She paid for it with a check. She kept the old Alice Chalmers in the shed, polished, maintained, a reminder. The world had changed. Farming had changed. But the fundamental truth had not. The quiet, steady application of work over time creates its own kind of power. A power that doesn't need permission. A power that doesn't need a loan officer's approval. A power that grows, season by season, in the black dirt. Which brings us back to that VFW Hall. February 14th, 2012. Eleanor Vance sits in the third row. She is 72 years old. She is about to buy the old Henderson homestead, the land owned by the family of the man who told her she couldn't make it. She bids $475,000. She says one word: cash. And the world finally understands. The auction ends. People crowd around her. They shake her hand. They congratulate her. She is gracious. She is quiet. She is the same Eleanor she has always been. Frank Henderson waits until the crowd thins. He walks over to her. He is a man in his 50s. He has his father's eyes. He looks uncomfortable. He looks like a man about to pay a debt that isn't his. "Mrs. Vance," he says. "Eleanor, that was something." Eleanor just nods. She waits. Frank clears his throat. "I need to tell you something. My father, he passed away 10 years ago, but he talked about you, especially near the end. He always said that refusing you that loan, back in '68, was the biggest mistake of his banking career. He said he was wrong. He wanted you to know that." Frank looks at her, expecting something. Absolution, maybe. Forgiveness. A smile. Eleanor Vance's expression does not change. Her eyes are not angry. They are not triumphant. They are clear, like a winter sky. She looks at this man, the son of the man who drew a circle around her life and told her not to step out of it. She says, "Your father didn't make a mistake, Frank. He made a decision. He looked at me, and he decided who I was. He decided what I was capable of. He was very certain." She pauses. I just decided he was wrong. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, as simple and as solid as the ground beneath their feet. It was the quietest devastation. The final entry in a ledger kept for 44 years. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind is the loneliest fight there is. Frank Henderson had nothing to say. He just stood there. In the silence, he finally understood. His father's mistake wasn't financial. It was a failure of imagination. He had looked at a woman and seen a widow. He had failed to see a farmer. But that's not the end of the story, because what Eleanor did next changed everything. She didn't farm the Henderson land. She didn't rent it out. She did something that no one in the county could have predicted. She went to a lawyer. She established a non-profit organization, the Vance Agricultural Trust. She endowed it with the 320 acres of the Henderson parcel. The trust's mission was simple: to provide no-interest operating loans and mentorship to first-generation farmers in the county. The loan application had only one question that mattered. Why do you want to farm? There was a preference stated in the trust's charter, a preference for women, for minorities, for anyone who had ever walked into a bank and been told no, for their own good. The trust's first loan, for $5,000, went to a young single mother who wanted to start a small organic vegetable farm. The second went to a young Hispanic couple who wanted to raise goats. They didn't just get a check, they got Eleanor. She would drive out to their farms. She would walk their fields. She would look at their equipment. She didn't give advice like a banker. She gave it like a farmer. Your soil is getting compacted here. That bearing sounds like it's about to go. Have you thought about planting a winter rye cover crop? She was not building a charity. She was building a community. A community based on the simple idea that everyone deserves the right to prove themselves, the right to succeed or fail on their own terms, on their own merit, not on someone else's certainty about their limitations. She also set up a scholarship, the David Vance Memorial Scholarship at the local community college. It wasn't for agronomy students, it was for students in the agricultural mechanics program, for the young people who wanted to learn how to fix the machines that make a farm run. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl with grease under her fingernails. She wanted to be a diesel mechanic. Her guidance counselor had told her to consider nursing. Eleanor met her at the scholarship dinner. The girl was nervous. She thanked Eleanor for the money. Eleanor shook her hand. She looked at the girl's hands. Capable. She said, "Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do, especially when they're smiling." The legacy wasn't just in the trust, it was in her own family. Her daughter, Sarah, got her PhD in soil science. She came home, she took over the home farm. She didn't just maintain it, she improved it. She experimented with new techniques, no-till farming, advanced cover cropping. She became one of the most respected farmers in the state, a leader in regenerative agriculture. She married a man who saw her as a partner. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They grew up on the farm. They grew up with the stories of their grandfather, David, and their grandmother, Eleanor. They grew up knowing that the dirt is enough. Today, if you visit that farm, you will see a modern, thriving operation. But in the corner of the main machine shed, there is an old tractor, an Alice Chalmers WC from 1948. The paint is faded. The seat is cracked. But it is clean. It is ready to run. It is a monument, a physical artifact of a quiet promise made a lifetime ago. Eleanor Vance passed away in 2019. She was 89 years old. Her funeral was held at the same VFW hall where she had bought the Henderson land. It was standing room only. The people who came were not the powerful. They were not the wealthy. They were the farmers she had mentored, the students she had sponsored, the people she had quietly believed in. They were her true harvest. Her granddaughter, now a young woman herself, sits at the old kitchen table, the same table where her grandmother counted out $450 from the sale of a used car. In front of her is a ledger. The leather cover is worn smooth. She opens it. The first page. Farm Operations, 1968. The handwriting is neat, precise, certain. She turns the pages. Decades of work, of planting and harvesting, of buying and selling, of profit and loss. A life recorded in columns of numbers. But it is more than a book of accounts. It is a story. A story of a woman who was told no. A woman who was told her place was smaller than her dreams. A woman who was offered a cage of kind intentions, and she answered not with words, but with work, with seasons, with soil. She answered with a life that was bigger than anyone's expectations. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. A child is being told their dream is unrealistic. An employee is being told their idea is too ambitious. A young woman is being told she is not strong enough, not smart enough, not enough. And the person telling them this might not be a villain. They might be a parent, a teacher, a boss, a friend. They might be saying it because they are afraid for you, because they believe they are protecting you. The most dangerous limitation is the one that is delivered with a kind smile. The story of Eleanor Vance is a reminder that the world's certainty about you is not your reality. Your potential is not a conversation. It is not a negotiation. It is a territory you discover for yourself. 1 acre at a time. The dirt is enough. Your work is enough. You are enough. If this story meant something to you, share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Someone who is facing a wall of kind intentions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel because the world is full of quiet heroes like Eleanor Vance. And we are going to keep telling their stories. Thank you for listening.